What happened when an undercover CEO discovered the silent struggles hiding behind the curtains of his own theater company? Welcome, insightful and kind-hearted listeners. You're in the right place today. This isn't just a story about stage lights and scripts. It's about the unseen performers, the crew members, tech staff, and overlooked workers who kept the show running while no one applauded them. Get ready for a moving journey of humility, revelation, and transformation. Thank you for tuning in. Your empathy brings these stories to life, and this one was made for someone just like you. Leonard Hayes stood alone in his corner office at Crescendo Arts Foundation, surrounded by polished wood, velvet drapes, and a framed collage of standing ovations. The Midtown Lyric Hall, his prize project, had just wrapped another sold-out season. On paper, it was a success. Ticket revenue at an all-time high, glowing media reviews, and gala donations that kept the foundation afloat. But Leonard wasn't looking at the numbers. He was holding a single creased letter, unsigned and scribbled in shaky handwriting. "We're breaking, Mr. Hayes. Please come see us backstage. Come when no one's looking." The note had arrived, tucked anonymously between quarterly reports, and though it was short, it hit with the force of a final bow. It wasn't the first time Leonard had heard quiet concerns. An abrupt resignation here, a backstage technician's complaint buried in HR files, but he had always assumed they were isolated. At the last board meeting, when he cautiously brought up rumors of staff burnout, a trustee laughed. "They're creatives," she said. "They live for the drama." Another waved it off entirely. Plenty of people would kill for those jobs. Leonard had forced a polite smile, but something inside him twisted. He hadn't stood under stage lights in years, hadn't stayed for a full tech rehearsal, hadn't walked the back halls since the early days, when he'd helped lay the foundation himself, back when the mission wasn't prestige but purpose. That night, Leonard made a decision. No press release, no orchestrated visit, just him, under the radar. He would become Eli, a temporary janitor hired to assist during night shifts, cleaning practice rooms, mopping the stage, hauling scenery. No executive badge, no name on the donor walls, just gloves, silence, and a chance to see the truth beneath the applause. If something was broken, he would find it, and this time, he would listen. The service elevator creaked as Leonard, now Eli, descended into the underbelly of Midtown Lyric Hall. Dressed in oversized coveralls with a laminated badge reading "Facilities Temp," he stepped into the staff corridor, where fluorescent lights buzzed and the glamour of the theater faded into chipped paint and echoing footfalls. The air smelled of sawdust, sweat, and stale coffee. Gone were the velvet curtains and champagne receptions. This was the heartbeat of the building, hidden behind stagecraft. His first assignment came from Carl, the grizzled night custodian who barely glanced up from his clipboard. "You've got Studio B and the orchestra pit tonight. Stick to the side halls. Actors get twitchy when they see maintenance mid-rehearsal." With that, he handed Leonard a mop and walked off. Leonard moved cautiously through corridors he hadn't walked in years. In the stairwell outside Studio B, he passed a young woman, barefoot, in worn tights, icing her ankle. "You shouldn't sit there," he offered quietly. She shrugged. "They told me to shake it off." A few doors down, he overheard hushed arguing, lighting crew members pleading for extra help, saying they'd been doubling shifts to meet a rushed production schedule. One whispered, "We lost Jules last week, full-on breakdown. They just swapped her out like scenery." What struck Leonard most wasn't the tension, it was the silence wrapped around it. People moved like they were on borrowed time, fast, focused, and afraid of being noticed. No one lingered, no one laughed. Everyone looked like they were bracing for the next missed cue. He caught sight of a crumpled cot wedged behind a curtain rack. Someone was clearly sleeping there. But no one spoke of it. The stories he'd dismissed as rumors were now breathing around him, wearing tired faces and taped-up ballet shoes. The stage above dazzled, but below, the floor was cracking, and Leonard had only just begun to see how deep the fissures ran. It was near midnight when Leonard first noticed the man with the limp. He moved through the costume warehouse like a ghost, careful, quiet, efficient. His name, stitched in a fading thread on his uniform, read Tomas. He couldn't have been older than 35, but his hunched posture and the permanent grimace etched into his features made him seem decades older. Leonard had been organizing prop shelves when Tomas stepped in to retrieve a set of hat boxes and a rack of sequin dresses. He favored one leg heavily, every movement measured to minimize the pain he thought no one noticed. But Leonard noticed. He also noticed the absence of any safety gear, the frayed harness tucked behind a dusty mannequin, and the lack of any team. Tomas was working solo, moving enough material to stock an entire production. During a quiet moment by the freight elevator, Leonard worked up the nerve to ask, "How long have you had the injury?" Tomas didn't meet his eyes. "Sprained it, badly, during load-in 2 weeks ago. Didn't have anyone to cover me." He said it like a fact, not a complaint. "I'm just glad I didn't drop the chandelier. That would have been the end of the gig." He smirked, then winced, the pain flashing beneath his bravado. Leonard offered to help finish his load, and they worked side by side, the silence between them heavy with unsaid truths. Later, Leonard found Tomas resting against a crate, eyes closed, a lunchbox untouched beside him. He asked why he hadn't reported the injury. Tomas shrugged. "If you can't dance, they replace you. If you can't lift, same deal." That simple statement echoed in Leonard's chest longer than any standing ovation ever had. Tomas wasn't just limping, he was holding up an entire production in pain, with no acknowledgement, no support, and no promise that help was coming. Leonard had come to Midtown Lyric to find cracks in the system. With Tomas, he found a fracture wide enough to swallow a man whole. The first glitch happened during a late-night cue test in the main theater. Leonard, still going by Jack, the night shift lighting trainee, stood by the tech panel as a tired assistant triggered Scene 7's spotlight sequence. Instead of the gentle fade-in, the house lights stuttered, flickered, then surged all at once, washing the stage in a sterile flood. The actors on stage flinched. One muttered, "Not again." It wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next few nights, Leonard watched as glitches multiplied, LED panels blinking mid-scene, fog machines jamming, and automated curtains lagging by several seconds. Each failure was patched hastily, blamed on wear and tear, then logged in a binder no one seemed to check twice. During one shift, Leonard traced the problem to a set of outdated breakers beneath the stage. Wires hung like vines, tangled and unlabeled, some patched with electrical tape. When he asked the lighting supervisor about a replacement, she sighed. "Been on the budget list for 3/4 now. Won't get approved unless a fire starts." Her tone was bitterly amused, but Leonard felt no humor. It was more than broken switches. It was a system held together by grit, tape, and sheer hope that nothing would break during a live show. What disturbed him most was how normalized it had become. Everyone worked around the dysfunction, memorizing the quirks of broken equipment like second nature. Nobody expected the system to work perfectly, they just hoped it wouldn't collapse at the wrong time. When Leonard asked why the issues weren't escalated, a grip shrugged. Nobody listens. We fix what we can, and the rest, pray that the audience does. That night, as he sat alone in the control booth watching the ghost light flicker, Leonard understood. The technical faults weren't just electrical, they were cultural. If Midtown Lyric didn't prioritize the safety and functionality behind the scenes, no standing ovation would ever justify what it cost the people making the magic happen. It was during a routine sound check that Leonard first noticed how quiet desperation could echo louder than applause. Assigned to monitor backstage acoustics, he stood in the wings beside a tangled cluster of audio cables and battered speakers, waiting for cues that never came. The evening's rehearsal had stalled. A headset crackled with static, and then silence. No one rushed to fix it. When Leonard asked the lead sound tech, Emilio, about the delay, the older man just waved a hand. "Interference. Happens every week. We will reroute or wait it out." Emilio's calm wasn't confidence, it was resignation. "We asked for replacements last season. Got a polite email instead." As Leonard helped untangle cords from a battered dolly, he saw more than malfunctioning gear. He saw fatigue, the kind that came from constant workaround. Emilio rubbed his temples between mic tests. A young assistant kept adjusting a mic stand that refused to lock. Even the actors' voices in the monitors sounded thinner, wearier, like they too were tired of shouting into systems that wouldn't listen. Later that night, Leonard walked past the whisper room, a supposedly soundproof recording booth, and noticed a note scrawled on the wall in marker. "If you scream in here, no one hears you, but no one asks why you're screaming anyway. It wasn't just equipment breaking down, it was communication. Suggestions died in inboxes, safety concerns faded into unanswered threads. No matter how loud the glitches or how obvious the fatigue, no real fix ever came. Leonard began to see that silence at Midtown Lyric wasn't just a technical failure, it was institutional. A culture where speaking up got you labeled dramatic, and staying quiet earned you praise for being low maintenance. He had come here expecting the magic of performance, but now, behind the curtains and within the headsets, he was hearing something else entirely, the sound of burnout, humming steadily beneath the show. It happened between scenes, when no spotlight was watching. Leonard was backstage during a dress rehearsal, helping to reposition a broken light rig, when a sudden clatter snapped his attention to stage right. Miria, the veteran stagehand with the limp, had collapsed beside a rolling scaffold, one arm slumped across a paint-streaked floor, the other still gripping a wrench. At first, a few crew members thought she had tripped, but when she didn't move, didn't even groan, panic spread like wildfire. Leonard rushed over, dropping to his knees, his heart slamming against his ribs. "Mireia," he whispered, shaking her gently. Her skin was cold with sweat. Someone called for first aid while the rest of the team froze in place, unsure whether to help or pretend it hadn't happened. Leonard noticed how few seemed surprised. The murmurs confirmed it. "She's been pulling doubles for 3 weeks. Didn't take her break again. Should have gone to a doctor about that cough." But no one had intervened. Not the production manager, not the assistant director. Everyone knew and everyone had let her fall. The EMTs arrived quickly, but not quickly enough to erase the image of Mireia being lifted onto a stretcher, eyes half open, mumbling something incoherent about needing to finish setting the props. Leonard stood frozen, guilt and fury boiling beneath his skin. It wasn't just about Mireia, it was about a system that mistook endurance for dedication, silence for stability. Back in the green room, her toolbox sat untouched beside a mug of cold tea, a quiet monument to everything she'd held together until her body finally gave out. Leonard knew then that this wasn't an isolated collapse. It was a warning siren. If someone didn't act soon, more would follow. The show might go on, but at what cost? And on whose broken backs? The day after Mireia's collapse, the air backstage was brittle with unspoken fear. Everyone was quieter, more mechanical, eyes darting over shoulders, conversations clipped. Leonard couldn't take it anymore. He had seen enough. As the cast and crew gathered in the orchestra pit for a pre-show briefing, Leonard stepped forward, not as Paul, the temporary electrician, but as Leonard Hale, founder of the Hale Performing Arts Company. Murmurs broke the hush instantly. The lighting apprentice dropped his clipboard. One of the stage managers muttered, "No way." Mireia's absence loomed heavy, her empty stool a sharp punctuation mark in the silence. "I owe you all the truth," Leonard began, his voice carrying with the kind of clarity only a man who'd stood on 1,000 stages could muster. "I came here undercover to understand what this place had become, and what I found," he paused, the lump in his throat harder to swallow than expected, "was not a lack of talent or skill, but a lack of care, of respect, of basic human decency." Gasps echoed softly as realization rippled through the crowd. Some looked betrayed, others just tired. A few, like Hannah, the overworked costume designer, looked like they'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to finally say it. Leonard continued, recounting the stories he'd witnessed, the skipped breaks, the unreported injuries, the quiet sacrifices made in the name of keeping the curtain rising. He didn't offer hollow apologies. He made promises. Clear, actionable ones, higher pay, mandatory rest periods, access to medical support, real leadership presence. "I let this place drift," he admitted. "But that changes today. No more shadows, no more silence." The room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. What Leonard saw was more powerful, posture shifting, guarded eyes softening, and, for the first time, people truly listening. Not to a speech, but to a man finally willing to stand beside them instead of above them. The days that followed Leonard's reveal were unlike anything the theater had experienced in years. The hush of uncertainty began to shift into tentative energy as reform swept through the company. Not in dramatic declarations, but in measured, meaningful actions. Leonard didn't retreat to a corner office. Instead, he remained on site, clipboard in hand, not to audit, but to ask. The first thing he did was halt all upcoming rehearsals for a day, not out of punishment, but to gather the entire staff in the house seats for an open forum. "Tell me," he said simply, and they did. Within a week, real changes took root. Every backstage crew member received a raise, including Miria, who was now resting at home under medical supervision, her job guaranteed and her medical costs covered by a new emergency wellness fund Leonard had established. Rest periods between shows were restructured, overtime rules rewritten to prevent burnout, new protective gear arrived for stagehands, meals were provided on double tech days, and for the first time, a mental health counselor was hired to support the artists and crew. But it wasn't just about policy. It was the way Leonard personally rolled up sleeves with Raphael during load-ins, the way he helped Hannah reorganize the cluttered costume storage, or sat next to Jasper as he recalibrated the soundboard, asking questions instead of giving orders. His presence became a symbol not of authority, but of accountability. The leadership staff, once rarely seen, now rotated through nightly shifts, joining front of house, backstage, and dressing rooms to understand the pace and pressure firsthand. It was in the quiet that the change rang loudest. People began lingering after shows to talk, not just about cues and props, but about ideas. Staff meetings once filled with nods and silence now crackled with honest opinions. Leonard didn't just give them reforms, he gave them a voice. And that, perhaps, was the most radical act of all. Weeks after Leonard's reveal and the sweeping reforms that followed, the atmosphere at Crescent Lyric Theatre had shifted in ways that couldn't be measured by revenue or ticket sales, but by something far more profound. The weight that once pressed down on the wings and green rooms had lifted. You could hear it in the laughter that bubbled between scene changes, in the easy banter shared over coffee between departments that once barely exchanged nods. Maria returned, not as a silent workhorse, but as a respected team member, with modified responsibilities and a newfound confidence that came from being seen. Raphael walked with less of a limp and more of a purpose, no longer bearing the weight of invisible labor alone. Jasper, once hidden in his booth, began mentoring a group of young apprentices, infusing every tech run with stories and smiles. Leonard made it a habit to wander the corridors in the early evenings, not inspecting but checking in, asking simple questions like, "How's your week going?" or "What's something you'd change if you could?" He listened not just to their answers, but to the tone, the pauses, the unsaid. He understood now, the sound that mattered most wasn't the applause from the audience or the crisp clarity of a mic check. It was the sound of a team that felt safe, respected, and empowered. What had once been a fractured company glued together by pressure was now a true ensemble. Everyone, from actors to ushers, from fly crew to finance, had a role not just on the payroll, but in the mission. The Crescent Lyric no longer just produced art, it lived its values backstage. And when the curtain rose each night, the show wasn't the only thing shining. It was the people, their pride, their unity, and their belief that what they did mattered. Months after Leonard Ashcroft traded his suit for stagehand coveralls, the Crescent Lyric Theatre had not only recovered, it had transformed. The change wasn't loud or flashy, it was steady, like the swell of an orchestra tuning toward perfect pitch. The staff now operated like a true ensemble, each department in rhythm with the next, communicating not through urgent whispers or backstage panic, but through clarity, collaboration, and trust. Schedules were fair, pay was livable, and staff meetings had become spaces of real dialogue, not just top-down announcements. The hush that once followed acts of burnout had been replaced with support systems and wellness check-ins. Silence no longer meant fear, it meant focus. Leonard continued to reject the spotlight, opting instead for quiet conversations in the wings or quick pep talks before curtain. He had stepped into a new role, not director, not executive, but anchor. He was there when the new lighting technician froze on her first cue, and he was there when Raphael led a standing ovation for the stage crew after a flawless matinee. Maria now sat on the leadership advisory board, her voice no longer just a whisper in the dark, but a guiding tone for future change. The company had begun to attract not just talent but loyalty. Former employees reached out to return, theater schools asked to send apprentices, and patrons, many of whom never knew what had changed, began to notice a new electricity in the performances, a sense of soul that had been missing before. Because now, the people behind the magic believed in what they were building, and in each other. As Leonard looked out over the stage during a quiet rehearsal, hearing laughter echo through the rafters, he felt something settle inside him. This wasn't just a job, and Crescent Lyric wasn't just a company. It was music, messy, layered, human, and for the first time it was finally in tune. The story of Leonard Ashcroft and the Crescent Lyric Theater teaches a profound lesson about leadership rooted in presence, humility, and empathy. For years, Leonard believed he understood the heartbeat of his theater company through reports, feedback forms, and secondhand updates. But it wasn't until he stepped behind the velvet curtain into the late-night shifts, the tech room frustrations, the aching joints of overworked crew, that he truly heard the silent cries for help. Real change began not with grand speeches or restructured budgets, but with one man choosing to listen without authority and act with compassion. Leonard learned that success isn't just about applause or profits. It's about the people who make the magic possible, night after night. When leaders lead from among, not above, they discover the cracks that spreadsheets can't show and the resilience that titles can't measure. By seeing and supporting those once overlooked, Leonard transformed a fractured organization into a harmonious ensemble. The lesson is clear. To build something lasting, we must not only demand excellence, but ensure dignity, humanity, and respect are part of the foundation. True harmony, after all, is not found in perfection, but in people working together, finally heard.